I found out on the plane yesterday. You know, in this league, anything can happen.
Well, it's finally happening. Chris Paul is officially a Portland Trailblazer. And if you were paying attention, the signs were everywhere.
And I think this summer, I'll make that decision with my family.
That wasn't just diplomatic talk. It was CP3 telling the world he's got options. Reports already surfaced that Paul isn't expected to return to San Antonio despite his incredible 82-game season at age 40. Now it's happening. But how did we get here? What does this mean for Scoot Henderson? And how could this reshape the West? Let's break it all down. The Portland transfer. Well, it looks like it's really happening. Chris Paul is heading to Portland. The 40-year-old future Hall of Famer just wrapped up what might be the most remarkable season by any player his age in modern NBA history. He defied Father Time, laughed off every doubt about aging athletes, and rewrote the playbook on late career greatness. And this Portland connection, it's not some wild internet rumor. According to reports from legitimate sources like Blazers Edge, there's genuine interest from the Trailblazers organization in potentially bringing CP3 to the Pacific Northwest. Not through a trade, because Paul is heading into free agency, but through good old-fashioned recruiting and relationship building. But let's get real about what this discussion actually sounds like behind closed doors. When Portland's front office talks about Chris Paul, they're not just talking about his basketball skills. They're talking about his potential impact on their young core, especially Scoot Henderson. Enter Scoot Henderson, stage left. This kid was the 3rd overall pick in 2023, and he's exactly the type of player who could benefit massively from having someone like Chris Paul around. Multiple sources, including Last Word on Sports, have specifically mentioned Paul's potential role as a mentor for Henderson. But let's talk about why this mentorship angle isn't just feel-good storytelling. It's backed up by recent tangible evidence of Paul's impact on young players. Look at what happened in San Antonio this past season with Stephon Castle. This rookie didn't just have a good season, he won Rookie of the Year. And basketball insiders are giving significant credit to Chris Paul's guidance for that development. That's not speculation. That's not theoretical. That's a direct, measurable impact that happened in real time, with cameras rolling and stats being recorded. Paul took a talented but raw rookie and helped transform him into the league's best first-year player. Now imagine that same influence being applied to Scoot Henderson, who's shown flashes of brilliance, but also areas where veteran guidance could make a massive difference. Henderson averaged 12.7 points and 5.1 assists this past season, but he also had 2.7 turnovers per game. Those are exactly the kinds of numbers that veteran point guard wisdom can help optimize. But here's where this story gets even more intriguing. Chris Paul isn't just some aging veteran looking for one last paycheck. This man just played all 82 games at age 40. Let me repeat that because it's absolutely insane. Every single game of an 82-game NBA season at age 40. In an era where 25-year-old superstars rest for load management, where players in their prime sit out back-to-backs, where teams are constantly worried about preserving their stars for the playoffs, Chris Paul said, "Nah, I'm good," and played every single night. His numbers, 8.8 points, 7.4 assists, and 3.6 rebounds per game, might not jump off the stat sheet, but anyone who understands basketball knows that Chris Paul's value has never been purely statistical. This is a guy who makes everyone around him better, who sees the game 3 plays ahead, who brings a level of basketball IQ that can't be taught in practice. And that's exactly what makes the Portland speculation so fascinating from both sides. For the Blazers, they're not just looking at adding a player, they're looking at adding a coach, a mentor, a culture setter, and a guy who could accelerate their young core's development by years rather than months. But let's flip the script and look at this from Chris Paul's perspective, because that's where things get really complex. This is a man who's played for 7 different teams throughout his legendary career. New Orleans, Los Angeles Clippers, Houston, Oklahoma City, Phoenix, Golden State, and now San Antonio. He's seen every type of organization, every type of situation, every type of opportunity. Reports indicate that Paul is entering free agency after his 1-year deal with the Spurs, which means he has choices, real choices. And at this stage of his career, those choices are about way more than money. Here's the million-dollar question that's keeping NBA executives awake at night. What does Chris Paul want at this point in his career? Does he want to chase that elusive championship ring that's been just out of reach his entire career? Or does he want to build something lasting, something meaningful, something that extends beyond his playing days? Because let's be real, Portland isn't a championship contender right now. They finished 46 this past season, which is respectable for a young team, but not exactly banner-hanging territory. If Paul joins the Blazers, he's not doing it for immediate title hopes. He's doing it for something else entirely. And that's what makes this story so compelling. We're potentially watching a future Hall of Famer make a decision that prioritizes legacy over hardware, development over immediate gratification, gratification, building over winning. But Portland isn't the only team in the mix, and that's where this story gets even juicier. The Dallas Mavericks have emerged as serious contenders for Paul's services, and they represent the complete opposite approach from Portland. Dallas wants Paul for one reason: to help them win a championship now. They've got the pieces, the urgency, and they've got a window that might be closing. For Paul, joining Dallas would be the traditional veteran move: chase the ring, accept a reduced role, and try to add that missing piece to an already impressive resume. Reports suggest that Paul prefers to stay in the Western Conference, which makes sense both geographically and competitively. The West is where the action is, where most of the championship contenders reside, and where Paul has spent most of his career. But here's what makes the Portland option so intriguing. It's different, it's unexpected. It's the kind of move that could define how we remember Chris Paul's career in ways that another championship chase might not. Think about it. If Paul joins a contender and wins a ring as the fourth or fifth option, that's a nice addition to his resume. But if he joins Portland and helps transform their young core into playoff contenders while mentoring the next generation of stars, that's a legacy-defining move. The basketball media is already having these exact conversations, and they're not holding back their opinions about what makes sense for both parties.
Does Chris Paul want to be a stable pony for Scoot Henderson on a team that's going nowhere fast?
That's the harsh reality check that every analyst is discussing. Chris Paul has been chasing a championship his entire career. He's made the playoffs countless times, been to conference finals, made it to the NBA finals, but that championship has remained just out of reach. At 40 years old, with limited time left in his career, every decision matters. The timing couldn't be more perfect either. We're in late May, the playoffs are winding down, free agency is approaching fast, and decisions made in the next few weeks are going to reshape multiple franchises for years to come. For Portland, landing Chris Paul would be about so much more than his on-court contributions. It would signal to their young players that the organization is serious about winning. It would show the rest of the league that they're not content to just develop talent and hope for the best. And it would give them a legitimate veteran presence who could bridge the gap between their rebuilding phase and their competitive window. The financial aspect makes sense too. Paul's recent contract with San Antonio was worth $10.46 million, which is reasonable for a player of his caliber and completely manageable for Portland's cap situation. But money has never been the primary motivator for Chris Paul at this stage of his career. This is a guy who's earned hundreds of millions of dollars, who's secured his family's financial future for generations, and who's now making decisions based on factors that go way beyond the bottom line. The media coverage around this potential move has been absolutely fascinating to watch unfold. You've got some analysts who think it's a perfect fit, others who think Paul should be chasing rings, and then there are those who question whether Portland is the right destination at all.
I just don't know why. If Chris Paul is just looking for a place to play basketball, there has to be a better place than Portland.
That skepticism is real, and it's coming from people who understand the NBA landscape. Portland represents a significant gamble for Paul, joining a team that's building rather than competing, taking on a mentoring role rather than pursuing individual accolades, and betting on potential rather than proven championship ingredients. Now let me tell you about the San Antonio Blueprint. Picture this scenario. You're heading into your 20th NBA season. You're 40 years old in a league where the average player retires before age 30. Most guys your age are either broadcasting games, coaching youth basketball, or sitting on beaches counting their money. The conventional wisdom says you should be grateful for whatever minutes you can get, happy to be a mentor figure who occasionally contributes off the bench. Chris Paul looked at that conventional wisdom and said, "Hold my energy drink," then proceeded to completely obliterate every expectation anyone had about aging gracefully in professional sports. Paul signed a one-year, $10,460,000 deal with the Spurs for the 2024-25 season, and from day one, it was clear this wasn't going to be a typical victory lap season. This was a man on a mission to prove that age really is just a number when you combine elite basketball IQ with obsessive preparation and an unrelenting competitive drive. The numbers tell part of the story, but they don't tell the whole story. Paul averaged 8.8 points, 7.4 assists, 3.6 rebounds, and 1.3 steals per game while shooting 42.7% from the field and 37.7% from three-point range. Those are solid numbers for any point guard, but for a 40-year-old, those numbers are from another planet. But here's what makes those statistics even more incredible. He did it while playing all 82 games, not 75 games with some rest days, not 65 games with injury management, not 50 games with veteran rest protocols. Every single game. In today's NBA, where load management is standard practice and players half Paul's age regularly sit out games for maintenance, this durability is absolutely unprecedented. When Paul reflected on this accomplishment, even he seemed surprised by what he'd managed to achieve.
Has it soaked in yet? L82 at age 39?
No, it's wild. Yeah, and for Drew to do it and Harrison, I just want them guys also to know. I mean, obviously I'm self-motivated, but it's always nice to have other people beside you, pushing you. And it's crazy, I didn't even realize Steph played 81, And yeah, it's been an unbelievable season.
That genuine surprise in his voice tells you everything you need to know about how remarkable this accomplishment was, even for someone who spent 2 decades defying expectations. But let's talk about the context that makes this season even more impressive. The Spurs weren't just asking Paul to show up and collect paychecks. They were asking him to be a legitimate contributor on a team with serious young talent and legitimate playoff aspirations. Victor Wembanyama was entering his 2nd season as one of the most exciting prospects the league has seen in decades. The team had a collection of young players who needed guidance, structure, and someone to show them what professional excellence looks like on a daily basis. Enter Chris Paul, and suddenly everything clicked into place. The most visible example of Paul's impact was his work with rookie Stephon Castle. Castle didn't just have a good rookie season, he won Rookie of the Year, and basketball insiders consistently point to Paul's mentorship as a crucial factor in that development. This wasn't just veteran advice in the locker room or casual conversations during practice. This was intensive, daily coaching from one of the smartest players in NBA history to a young guard who had all the tools but needed to learn how to use them effectively. But here's where the story gets even more fascinating. Despite this obvious success, multiple sources indicate that Paul isn't expected to return to San Antonio. Why would a team move on from someone who just had such a clearly positive impact? The answer reveals the complex nature of roster construction in today's NBA. The Spurs made some significant moves during the season, including acquiring De'Aaron Fox in February and winning the draft lottery to secure the number 2 overall pick. Suddenly, their backcourt became crowded with talent. This isn't about Paul's performance or value. It's about roster fit and long-term planning. The Spurs are building around their young core, and while Paul was instrumental in their development, they might need those minutes and that salary cap space for players who fit their timeline better. But from Paul's perspective, this creates an incredibly interesting situation. When asked about his future at the end of the season, his response suggested someone who still has plenty to offer and isn't ready to step away from the game.
Man, you can phrase them questions any way you want them to. I'm gonna tell you, it's been unbelievable here, and I mean it. I mean it, seriously. It's been unbelievable, and I think this summer I'll make that decision with my family.
That doesn't sound like someone who's winding down his career. That sounds like someone who's energized by what he accomplished and ready to do it again somewhere else. And honestly, why wouldn't he be energized? Look at what he proved this season. Playing 82 games at age 40 isn't just a feel-good story. It's a complete redefinition of what's possible for veteran players in the modern NBA. For young players like Scoot Henderson in Portland, having someone like Paul around could accelerate their development by years rather than months. Henderson averaged 12.7 points and 5.1 assists, but also had 2.7 turnovers per game, exactly the kind of inefficiency that veteran point guard wisdom can help address. The San Antonio experience also proved something crucial about Paul's adaptability. The Spurs didn't need him to be the primary scorer or even the primary playmaker every night. They needed him to be smart, steady, and professional. They needed him to make the right play at the right time, to organize the offense when necessary, and to set an example for younger players. He excelled in all those roles without his ego getting in the way. Many veteran superstars struggle with accepting reduced roles as their careers wind down, but Paul embraced the challenge and found ways to maximize his impact within whatever role the team needed. Paul's competitive spirit remained absolutely intact throughout the season, and this was evident even in games that had no playoff implications. His approach to competition never wavered, regardless of the stakes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I always say I hate to lose more than I like to win, and if it's a game, we show up, what we gonna do?
This mentality is exactly what young teams need. Players who maintain professional standards even when games are meaningless, who understand that how you do anything is how you do everything. When asked about why the Spurs had their veteran rotation players competing hard in a meaningless final game, Paul's response revealed his philosophy about professionalism and preparation.
Competition. Competition. I get it, the standings, all this different type stuff, but when you're a kid and you thinking about hooping and trying to make it to the NBA, you want to play. You want to play, and I've said this all year long. I've had 5 hand surgeries, meniscus surgeries, all this, so I've sat over there with the inability to play. And so you never know when it may be your last game or your last opportunity to play.
This perspective, understanding the privilege of playing professional basketball, maintaining gratitude for the opportunity, and never taking a single game for granted, is exactly the kind of wisdom that can transform young players' careers. The Spurs experience created a blueprint for how teams can maximize Chris Paul's remaining value. It's not about asking him to be 25-year-old Chris Paul. It's about utilizing 40-year-old Chris Paul's unique combination of experience, intelligence, and still considerable incredible skill to elevate everyone around him. Paul's reflection on his role as a veteran leader revealed both his maturity and his understanding of what it takes to impact young players positively.
So for the guys, I try not to be too abrasive or whatnot, but I know what a privilege it is to be in this league, right? And so it's tough at times when I see guys who take it for granted, right? So I'm just always constantly talking to them about watching and learning and understanding all the details of the games.
This wisdom, this perspective, this understanding of what it takes to succeed at the highest level. That's what teams like Portland are really interested in acquiring. They're not just getting a player, they're getting a coach, a mentor, and a living example of what professional excellence looks like. The question now becomes, which organization will be smart enough to follow the Spurs blueprint and give Paul the opportunity to continue this remarkable late career renaissance? The San Antonio experiment proved it works. Now someone else gets to benefit from that knowledge. The ripple effect. Let's start with the broader context of what's been happening around the league this season, because the 2024-25 campaign was absolutely wild in terms of player movement and roster construction. The most shocking move was the Luka Doncic for Anthony Davis trade between Dallas and the Lakers, a deal that literally had fans checking to see if their apps had been hacked because it seemed so impossible. But beyond the blockbuster headlines, there's been a fascinating trend developing around veteran players finding new ways to extend their careers and impact winning. Chris Paul isn't just participating in this trend, he's leading it, showing other aging stars that there are alternatives to either chasing rings as bench players or retiring when conventional wisdom says their time is up. The veteran landscape in today's NBA is more complex than it's ever been. Players are staying healthier longer, training methods are more advanced, and teams are getting smarter about how to utilize experienced players in ways that maximize their remaining value while managing their limitations. Paul's 82-game season at age 40 isn't just an individual accomplishment, it's a proof of concept that could influence how other veterans approach their career endings and how teams evaluate older players. If CP3 can play every game at 40, what does that mean for other 35, 36, 37-year-old players who thought their primes were behind them? Now let's talk about the specific teams that are reportedly interested in Paul's services, because each represents a completely different philosophy about how to build a championship contender. The Dallas Mavericks have emerged as serious contenders for Paul, and their interest makes perfect sense from a traditional championship-chasing perspective. Dallas has the pieces to compete now. They have a window that might be closing, and they need veteran depth to make a serious title run. For the Mavericks, Paul represents insurance, experience, and playoff savvy. They're not looking for him to be a primary option. They want him to be the steady hand who can manage games, make crucial plays in big moments, and provide leadership when things get chaotic in the postseason. Reports indicate that Paul prefers to stay in the Western Conference, which narrows his options but also creates some fascinating possibilities. The West is loaded with talent, which means any team that can add a player of Paul's caliber and intelligence could significantly improve their positioning. Let's dive deeper into what Portland specifically brings to the table, because their situation is unique in several important ways that go beyond just basketball fit. The Trailblazers finished 36-46 this past season, which places them in that interesting middle ground where they're not quite playoff contenders, but they're also not bottom feeders. They're in the sweet spot where veteran influence could make a massive difference in their trajectory. Their young core is legitimately promising. Scoot Henderson showed flashes of brilliance in his second season. Shaedon Sharpe provides scoring punch, and players like Anthony Simons give them offensive versatility. The question isn't whether they have talent, it's whether they can put it all together and develop the consistency needed to compete at a high level. This is where Paul's value becomes crystal clear. Portland ranked 27th in assists per game this past season, which indicates significant room for improvement in ball movement and offensive flow. Paul's 7.4 assists per game might not sound overwhelming on paper, but his ability to organize an offense and create opportunities for others could completely transform their attack. But it's not just about on-court production. Portland has struggled with consistency and late-game execution, areas where veteran leadership can make an enormous difference. Having someone who's been in every conceivable situation, who's played in countless big games, who knows how to manage pressure. That kind of influence can elevate an entire roster. The basketball analysis community has been breaking down exactly what Paul could bring to Portland's specific situation, and the potential impact goes far beyond traditional statistics. That analysis hits on something crucial. Paul's role wouldn't necessarily be about putting up big numbers. It would be about optimizing everyone else's performance, particularly Henderson's development as a floor general. The financial aspect also works in Portland's favor. Paul's recent contract was worth $10.46 million, which is completely reasonable for a player of his caliber and easily manageable within their salary cap structure. For a team that's been conservative with their spending, adding Paul wouldn't break their budget but could dramatically improve their competitiveness. However, money isn't the primary consideration for Paul at this stage of his career. This is a player who's earned over $400 $200 million in career earnings, who secured his family's financial future for generations, and who's now making decisions based on legacy, fulfillment, and personal satisfaction rather than maximum dollars. Speaking of legacy, let's talk about what Paul has already accomplished and how his next move could define how we remember his incredible career. Born in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, Paul has played 20 NBA seasons across 7 different teams, establishing himself as one of the greatest point guards in basketball history. His career averages of 17.0 points, 9.2 assists, 4.4 rebounds, and 2.0 steals per game over 1,354 regular season games put him in rare company among NBA legends. He's been selected to 12 All-Star games, earned 11 All-NBA selections, and made 9 All-Defensive teams. He's won Olympic gold medals and was named to the NBA 75th anniversary team. The only thing missing from that incredible resume, an NBA championship. This brings us to the central tension in Paul's decision-making process. Does he prioritize finally winning that elusive ring, potentially accepting a reduced role on a championship contender? Or does he focus on maximizing his impact and cementing his legacy as a mentor and developer of young talent? There's historical precedent for both approaches. Some veterans successfully chase rings in their final years, joining established teams and finding fulfillment in contributing to championship runs, even if they're not the primary stars. Others choose to be the centerpiece of younger teams, using their experience to accelerate development and build something lasting. For Paul, the Portland option represents the latter path. He wouldn't join the Blazers expecting to win a championship in the next year or two. He'd join them to help build a foundation that could eventually compete for titles, while his influence shapes the next generation of NBA stars. The broader implications of this decision extend throughout the league. Player movement has become increasingly common, and veteran players are more willing than ever to change teams to find situations that match their goals and priorities. Social media has amplified every rumor and piece of speculation, creating a 24/7 news cycle that can influence actual decision-making. NBA insiders and fans analyze every possibility, creating narrative momentum that sometimes becomes self-fulfilling. What's particularly fascinating about Paul's situation is how it parallels some of the most chaotic and impactful moves in recent NBA history. While his potential signing wouldn't technically be a trade, the ripple effects could be just as significant as any blockbuster deal. The 2025 trade deadline featured several major moves that reshaped the competitive landscape, including the Doncic Davis swap and De'Aaron Fox's move to San Antonio. These transactions created new possibilities for player movement and demonstrated how quickly the league's power structure can shift. Paul's decision will likely trigger additional moves throughout the summer. If he chooses Portland, it might signal to other veterans that rebuilding teams can offer attractive opportunities for players who want to remain impactful rather than simply collecting paychecks. If he chooses a contender like Dallas, it reinforces the traditional model of ring chasing that's dominated veteran decision-making for decades. The timing couldn't be more crucial. Free agency is approaching rapidly, and teams are finalizing their off-season strategies. Paul's choice will influence not just his own future, but potentially the directions of multiple franchises and the career decisions of other veteran players around the league. From Portland's perspective, landing Paul would represent more than just adding talent. It would signal to their young players that the organization is committed to accelerating their timeline and competing sooner rather than later. It would show the rest of the league that they're not content to simply develop talent and hope for gradual improvement. For other young teams around the league, Paul's decision could establish a new template for how to use veteran additions. Instead of waiting until you're already competitive to add experienced players, why not bring them in earlier to help accelerate the development process? The basketball community will be watching the situation closely because it reflects broader trends that are reshaping how teams think about roster construction, how players approach career decisions, and how the relationship between winning and development continues to evolve. Whatever Paul decides, his remarkable 2024-25 season has already proven that conventional wisdom about aging athletes needs to be completely reconsidered. His 82-game campaign at age 40 isn't just an individual achievement. It's a blueprint that could influence how other veterans approach the latter stages of their careers. Thanks for joining us today. Check out our other videos for more thrilling content.